I was 74 when my son leaned across my kitchen table, lowered his voice, and said, "Mom, you don't need a lawyer." The way he said it, calm, practiced, almost gentle, told me I absolutely did. He didn't know then that I had already hired two. The morning had started like any other. Tea warming my hands, the house creaking the way old bones do. My late husband used to say our home breathed with us. Now it breathed only with me. I'd grown used to silence, but not to the tone my family had begun using. Soft, careful, dismissive, as if I'd already left this world and my body just hadn't realized it yet. Stuart arrived without calling. Lately, he rarely knocked. He simply entered, looking around as though checking what else time had worn down. His wife, Clara, followed him, her perfume reaching the room a second before her irritation did. She smiled with lips that had forgotten sincerity years ago. "Mom," Stuart said, pulling out a chair, "we've been thinking. This house, it's a lot for you, and finances at your age can get tricky." At my age. As if 60 suddenly flips into 80 and 80 collapses into helplessness. Clara placed a folder on the table, sleek, expensive, smelling faintly of someone else's intentions. "Just routine documents," she explained. "Things to make your life easier. Nothing you need to overthink." I'd been a librarian for 42 years. I know the weight of a lie from the way it sits inside a sentence. And this one sat heavy. Still, I nodded politely and poured tea for them, though neither touched their cups. Clara was impatient. Stuart was nervous. They kept glancing at the folder, waiting for me to open it. I didn't. Instead, I asked, "Why don't you tell me what's inside?" They exchanged a look, quick, sharp, rehearsed. "It's just some simplifications," Stuart said. "Legal housekeeping. You don't need a lawyer for any of it." That phrase again. You don't need a lawyer. My husband had been dead 14 years, but I could almost hear him breathe beside me. "Be careful, Evelyn. People reveal themselves in small sentences." I pressed my fingers to the edge of the table, feeling the faint groove he once carved accidentally with his wedding ring. I didn't answer right away. Silence is a tool older women wield with more accuracy than anyone suspects. Stuart mistook my quiet for confusion. "It's okay, Mom. We'll guide you through everything. We just want what's best for you." No. They wanted the house. They wanted my accounts. They wanted access to a lifetime I had built stitch by stitch, penny by penny, while they visited on holidays and phoned only when something needed fixing or funding. But I didn't show any of that. Not yet. "Leave the folder," I said gently. "I'll look at it later." Clara hesitated. She didn't like the delay. Control is a fragile thing, easily threatened by patience. But she put on her polite face and stood. "We'll stop by next week," she said. "Just don't sign anything complicated on your own." A soft laugh escaped me before I could stop it. On my own. As if solitude had ever weakened me. After they left, I sat in the quiet and let the mask on my face fall. I opened the folder. What I found inside wasn't simplification. It was erasure. Signatures that would remove my ownership. Transfers. Permissions. A future where I'd live in a facility, not a home. A life compressed into a line item. For a long moment, I didn't move. Then I reached for the small card tucked into my dresser drawer, the number of an attorney recommended by a woman at church. I dialed it slowly, deliberately. When the receptionist answered, I said, "I'll need an appointment, and 2 lawyers, not 1. She asked why. I looked at the folder again, its polished edges shining like teeth. "Because," I said quietly, "I intend to be heard." People think disrespect arrives like thunder, loud, unmistakable. But in truth, it slips in quietly. Soft comments, small sighs, a raised brow instead of a question. By the time you realize it has settled into your home, it's already rearranged all the furniture. After Stuart and Clara left that morning, I began noticing things that had been happening for months, maybe years. But I had been too forgiving, or too tired, to name them. Now they stood in front of me with cruel clarity. There was the way Clara always spoke to me as though I were a child who kept losing her mittens. "Evelyn, did you remember to take your pills today?" "Evelyn, are you sure you should be cooking alone?" "Evelyn, that dress is sweet, but maybe something more age-appropriate?" I used to smile politely, brush it off as her poor sense of humor. But now I felt how every word chipped at me. There was the way Stuart answered my calls, quick, clipped, always during a car ride or lunch with someone more important. "Mom, I'm busy. Can this wait?" If I asked about his life, he was irritated. If I asked for help, he sighed. Somehow, always, I was the inconvenience. Always the one who needed to adjust. Then the money requests started appearing like weeds. First, a little loan to help them move to a bigger house. Then, a temporary contribution for Clara's new work computer. Then, the renovations for the basement for resale value, which I somehow ended up paying for. Each time, Stuart promised to pay me back. Each time, the promise dissolved like breath on cold glass. I excused it. I told myself parents are supposed to give. But the truth is, giving had slowly turned into owing. Owing them my patience, my silence, my compliance. 2 weeks before the folder appeared, Clara had stopped by with a bag of groceries. Unusual, but not unwelcome. I thanked her warmly. She just smiled thinly and said, "Well, it's good to know you can still manage basic chores, Evelyn. We worry, you know." We worry. Funny how people claim to worry only when it's convenient for them. Another time, Stuart walked through my house, running his hand over the banister, eyes wandering the hallway. "This place must feel big for you now," he said. "Too much upkeep. Too many hazards. I mean, it's just not safe for someone your age." Someone your age. Like he already saw me slipping, faltering, disappearing. But I wasn't disappearing. I was simply quiet. And quiet women are often mistaken for weak. A few days after the folder incident, Clara invited herself in again. She didn't even sit down before she began talking. "We've been thinking," she said, smoothing her blouse, "that maybe it's time to start simplifying your life. You know, for your own comfort." "Comfort," I repeated, tasting the word. "And what would that look like?" "Well," she said brightly, "you could move somewhere smaller, somewhere supervised. And the house, well, it could be sold. You don't really use all these rooms, and honestly, the market is favorable right now." I felt my fingers tighten around the arm of my chair. What about my garden, my books, my life here? "Oh, Evelyn," she sighed as if I were being dramatic. "Sometimes we have to let things go. Let things go." I finally understood. They were preparing me to let go of everything, by convincing me I no longer deserved anything. Later that evening, I found myself staring at the mirror above my bathroom sink. The woman looking back at me wasn't fragile. Her eyes were tired, yes, but steady. Her hair was silver, but neatly pinned. She had survived loss, loneliness, and long years of work. She had lived through decades of bills, buried friends, and quiet mornings without her husband. She was not collapsing. She was standing. I spoke softly to that reflection. They think you're fading, but you're not. You're waking up. The next morning, when Stuart called to check in, his tone was sweet enough to rot teeth. He asked if I had reviewed the documents, asked when I planned to sign, asked if I needed help interpreting anything. Interpreting, as though I hadn't read more books in my lifetime than he had emptied arguments. I told him I needed a few more days. His breath tightened. Mom, don't drag this out. It's simple. Just sign it. Just sign it. A lifetime compressed into 2 words. When he hung up, I didn't feel fear. I felt heat, low and steady, forming in my chest. A slow burn. The kind a woman feels when she decides she will no longer be spoken to like a shadow. Quietly, without ceremony, I opened my notebook, the same one where I used to write grocery lists, and added a new page. Instances of disrespect. By the time I finished writing, 3 pages were full. Not of complaints, of reminders. Reminders of why I was done being silent. The first real shift happened on a Tuesday, the kind of day that passes through a life unnoticed unless something inside you has begun to sharpen. It was drizzling outside, a thin gray rain that made the world look smudged. I was folding laundry when my phone buzzed. Stuart never called in the morning. He disliked unpredictability, unless, of course, he needed something. "Mom," he said without preamble, "I'm stopping by after work. There are a few papers we should review together. Nothing stressful." Nothing stressful. He had begun seasoning every request with reassurance, like sugar dust to hide the bitterness underneath. "I'll be home," I said. My voice sounded calm even to me. When he arrived later than evening, the rain had already stopped, but he shook off droplets dramatically, as if the weather had personally wronged him, then stepped inside without wiping his shoes. He carried a thick envelope this time, not a sleek folder. Something heavier. Clara wasn't with him. That somehow made his presence feel more dangerous. He sat at the table and pulled out a stack of documents. Legal text, signature lines, several pages stamped with a notary's placeholder. My pulse didn't rise. I'd read enough in recent weeks to recognize what these were. "Mom," he began, sounding almost rehearsed, "I've been talking with some professionals who handle elder finances. They say it's risky for someone your age to manage everything alone. One slip, one missed payment, and you could, well, it's better to prevent trouble." "Trouble," I repeated. "For whom?" He blinked at me, startled. "For you, of course." It was the first time he'd stumbled in months. He pushed one document toward me. "This one appoints me to look over your accounts, just routine access, so I can make sure everything is in order." Routine access, a polite synonym for control. "And this," he continued, sliding another sheet forward, "ensures the house is protected. Legally, it would transfer ownership to me, but you'd still have full rights to live here. Nothing changes day to day. It's just safer this way." Safer. Always that word. As if fear could be a leash. "And why?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Is this safer for me?" He looked irritated, then softened his tone in the way adults use when explaining things to toddlers. "Because you're 74, Mom. You forget things. You misplace documents. And Clara and I, well, we're in a better position to handle these things." I forget things. I misplace documents. Was that how they discussed me when I wasn't in the room? As a fragile object wrapped in fragile thoughts? He continued talking about probate, about responsibility, about the importance of planning ahead. His words spilled in clean lines. He had memorized them. Someone else had fed them to him. That consultant, most likely, the one Clara mentioned in passing weeks earlier. "May I see the last page?" I asked. He smiled, relieved he'd worn me down. He handed it to me. The final page wasn't a summary. It was the heart of the scheme. Full, durable power of attorney. Unrestricted. Immediate. Irrevocable. He waited for my reaction, but I set the paper down without blinking. "When did you start all this paperwork?" I asked. "Oh," he waved a hand. "I've been preparing for a while. It's better to have everything ready. These things take time." I watched him closely. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't conflicted. He was confident, because in his mind, I was already compliant. "I see," I said. He sat straighter, sensing victory. "Good. So maybe we should sign tonight? I already arranged for a notary tomorrow if you'd like the documents processed right away." Arranged. Already arranged. He'd skipped past my consent entirely. I stood and walked to the cabinet where I kept my glassware. Not because I needed a drink, but because I needed a moment with my back turned. A moment to pull the anger down, shape it into something cool and sharp. "Stuart," I said gently as I returned, "why are you in such a hurry?" He exhaled, impatient. "Because delays complicate things. Because if something happens to you—" "If something happens to me," I interrupted, "is that what you've been planning for?" His jaw tightened. A small muscle near his temple twitched. "Mom," he said sharply, "don't be dramatic. I'm trying to help you." Help. The most misused word in a manipulator's vocabulary. I sat down again, folded my hands, and met his eyes. "Leave the documents. I'll read them." He seemed dissatisfied, but he didn't argue. Instead, he neatly placed the stack on the table, tapping the top page twice with his finger, as if sealing an unspoken agreement. "I'll come by this weekend," he said. "Please, don't make this harder than it needs to be." When he walked out, I didn't feel broken. I felt something else. A steadiness spreading beneath my ribs. A rising clarity, quiet but firm, like the first note of a song I hadn't sung in years. For the first time in a long time, I understood. Stuart wasn't trying to protect me from the world. He was trying to protect the world from me, from a mother who might say no. The house was quiet after Stuart left. Too quiet, the sort that presses against your ears as if waiting for you to break. I sat at the table staring at the stack of documents he'd brought. The paper smelled faintly of ink and someone else's intentions, not mine. I didn't touch it. Not yet. Instead, I reached for the small tin box I kept on the top shelf of my bedroom closet. It wasn't for sentiment. It was my practical box, the one where I stored receipts, tax statements, copies of old insurance forms. Years ago, Stuart had teased me for keeping obsolete paperwork. Now it felt like armor. I spread everything across my bed: property tax statements, paid in full, insurance premiums, paid ahead, maintenance receipts, names of contractors, even the last appraisal report. All proof, not for anyone else, but for myself, that I was not the confused, incompetent woman Stuart pretended me to be. I didn't misplace documents. I kept them because I knew someday I might need them to defend my life from people who spoke softly while plotting loudly. As I sorted through the papers, something bothered me. Not the documents he brought, but the confidence with which he had pushed them at me. That confidence didn't come from guesswork. It came from prior steps, which meant he'd already done something without my knowledge. The next morning, I drove to the bank. I hadn't driven much in recent months. My knees were stiff, my eyes slower, but I still knew how to steer myself. The parking lot was quiet. The same ivy still crawled along the brick walls as it had for the past 20 years. Inside, the lobby smelled of polished floors and air conditioning. A young employee approached me, polite but distracted, the way people often become around older women. "How can I help you today, ma'am?" I told him my name, and he led me to a small office with an older banker I recognized. Mr. Alden, kind eyes, steady hands. He'd known my husband. He'd known me when I was still Evelyn who brought homemade muffins, not Evelyn who might be a burden. "What brings you in?" he asked gently. "I'd like to know," I said, "whether my son has attempted to access my accounts." He blinked once. Slowly. Not from surprise, no, from the effort of choosing the right words. "Well," he began, "there have been inquiries." Inquiries, a careful word to soften the reality. "Show me," I said. He hesitated, then turned his monitor slightly toward me. I didn't understand all the codes, but I understood dates. 2 attempts to access my portfolio. 1 attempt to initiate an update to my beneficiary list. 3 meetings with a family wealth advisor. The dates aligned with the first time Clara started dropping comments about your future living arrangements. I felt something inside me settle, not panic, not fear. A quiet, steady certainty, as if a puzzle piece had clicked into place. "I never authorized any of that," I said. "Which is why nothing was changed," he reassured me. "But Mrs. Marlowe, it may be wise to secure your accounts more tightly." I nodded. "I'd like to place full restrictions, notifications, password changes, whatever you recommend." He made the changes while I watched, his fingers moving quickly over the keyboard. When he finished, he handed me a folder. "If anyone tries again, you'll know." I thanked him and walked outside into the sharp sunlight. My knees ached, but my resolve didn't. On the drive home, a memory flickered. A small one, easy to overlook. A month earlier, Stuart had stopped by, "Just to check the mail for you." I'd thought it strange at the time. I wasn't away, and I certainly didn't need help retrieving envelopes from a wooden box. But now I saw the truth behind his forced casualness as he rifled through letters, holding some a moment too long, asking questions about bills I hadn't discussed with him. He'd been gathering information, preparing. By the time I reached my house, I felt neither anger nor betrayal. Something more refined had replaced it. Clarity. I placed the bank folder next to the documents Stuart had brought. 2 stacks of paper. 2 versions of my future. 1 written by others, and 1 I was beginning to shape myself. That evening, I made myself chicken soup. Simple, steady, something my hands remembered even when my mind wandered. But my mind wasn't wandering tonight. It was alert, crisp. While the soup simmered, the phone rang. Clara. "Evelyn," she chirped, too sweet. "Just calling to see if you need anything. Tea? Groceries? Help with the house?" Help? That cursed word again. "No, thank you," I said. "Well," she continued with a light false laugh, "Stuart was worried you might get overwhelmed by all the paperwork. We know legal language can be confusing. It isn't confusing to me," I interrupted. Silence. Short. Surprised. "Well, that's wonderful," she finally said, though her tone said the opposite. "We'll come by this weekend. Maybe we can finalize those forms." Finalize. They truly believed this was a foregone conclusion. "Of course," I said calmly. "I'll be ready." And I would be. Because now, at last, I knew exactly what I was fighting. Not for the house, not for the money, for my dignity. The decision to see a lawyer didn't come in a burst of bravery. It came the way most turning points arrive in an old woman's life, quietly, after a long exhale, when you finally admit that kindness has been mistaken for surrender. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not Stuart, not Clara, especially not them. I put on my gray coat, the one with deep pockets, and tucked the bank folder inside. My hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from anger that had settled into my bones so thoroughly it felt like age. The law office was in a modest brick building near the post office. I'd passed it 1,000 times without ever imagining I'd cross its threshold. The sign read, Harris and Bloomfield, Attorneys at Law. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and toner. A young receptionist lifted her eyes, startled, as though women my age only entered such buildings to ask for directions, not representation. "Good morning," she said, softening her tone instinctively. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," I answered, "but I believe I need one." She smiled sympathetically. "May I ask the reason for your visit?" I placed my bank folder on the counter, the weight of it speaking before I did. "I'd like to discuss some attempted financial actions regarding my estate," I said. "And I'd like 2 lawyers, not 1. Her eyebrows rose, pleasant surprise, not mockery. "Of course, ma'am. Let me check who's available." A few minutes later, I was seated in a quiet office with a window overlooking the street. Across from me sat 2 women, Attorney Bloomfield, sharp-eyed and steady, and Attorney Harris, younger but keen, with a posture that said she'd seen too many families tear themselves apart for money. They didn't treat me like someone fragile. They didn't soften their voices. They didn't assume I'd misunderstand. It was the first respect I'd felt in months. "What brings you to us, Mrs. Marlowe?" Bloomfield asked. I slid the stack of documents toward them, the ones Stuart had brought. "My son wants me to sign these." Harris's eyes scanned the first page, then widened. "This is a full transfer of property rights." "And this," Bloomfield added, flipping another page, "is a broad, durable power of attorney, irrevocable without your son's consent." I felt a hard knot form in my chest as they said it aloud, confirming what I already knew but hadn't allowed myself to fully name. "It appears," Bloomfield continued, her voice careful, "that someone is attempting to gain complete control of your assets." "I thought so," I said quietly. "Have you been pressured to sign these?" "Yes." "By your son?" "Yes." Harris set the papers down and looked at me, not pityingly, but with the kind of recognition women reserve for one another when they've lived long enough to know betrayal carries its own scent. "Mrs. Marlowe," she said, "you need to protect yourself. Today." I nodded, steady. "I agree." Bloomfield folded her hands. "We can start by drafting a statement of your intent, securing your property, and creating legal blocks against unauthorized access. But before that, did your son attempt to access your accounts?" "He attempted," I said. "More than once." Both attorneys exchanged a meaningful glance. "That means we escalate," Harris said. "If someone is preparing to assume control of your finances without consent, that's not a family misunderstanding. That's exploitation." The word hit me, not cruelly, but directly. Exploitation. Not fussing, not overprotectiveness, not misunderstanding. Exploitation. "I'm not letting them take anything," I said. "Not my house, not my accounts, not my choices." "Good," Bloomfield said. "Then listen carefully. Here is what we'll do." For the next 40 minutes, they outlined a plan. Simple, structured, and shockingly cathartic. Immediate restriction on all financial access. New authorizations, new passwords, alerts to the bank. A formal notice to be sent to Stuart, documenting that no financial decisions would be made through him. creation of an emergency directive, naming a neutral third party, not family, to handle future needs. Legal documentation of undue pressure in case things escalated. And finally, a meeting, one they would attend with me. Do not tell your son you've hired us, Harris warned. When people intend to take something, they accelerate when they sense resistance. I nodded. He wants me to sign this weekend. Then, Bloomfield said, her voice smooth and certain, we will be there. A strange thing happened then. I exhaled. Not in relief. No, not that. Something different. A release of years, of being diminished, spoken over, managed, maneuvered. Of being told that age made me small. When I left the office, the sun had broken through the clouds. I hadn't noticed how heavy the sky had been until it lifted. The receptionist stopped me at the door. Mrs. Marlowe? Yes? It was brave of you to come in. I didn't feel brave. I felt awake. Thank you, I said. Bravery isn't loud. Sometimes it sounds like a woman dialing a number she's been staring at for weeks. I walked to my car with a new steadiness. Not confidence, I wasn't there yet. But something better. Direction. Stuart wanted me unguarded this weekend. Good. Let him think I was unprepared. Because when he said, Mom, you don't need a lawyer, I would be ready to look him in the eyes and answer, I brought two. The days leading up to the weekend felt different. Not heavier, not frightening, but tense in the way air feels before a storm. People think fear grows louder with age, but for me, it had done the opposite. It had quieted. What grew louder instead was clarity. Stuart called twice on Thursday, once on Friday morning. He wasn't checking on my health. He was checking on my compliance. Mom, have you reviewed the papers? Yes. And? I'm still thinking. He didn't like that answer. Silence crackled across the phone line, followed by forced patience. Don't overcomplicate this. We're trying to make things easier for you. Easier. As if stealing the roof from over my head would lighten my load. Clara sent a message, too. A cheerful one, the kind written through gritted teeth. Let us know if you have questions. You know legal things can be overwhelming at your age. At your age. I'd begun to hear that phrase the way a soldier hears incoming fire. Instantly. Instinctively. On Friday evening, they arrived early, uninvited. Stuart rang the bell twice, briskly, as if knocking on the door of someone who owed him a debt. When I opened it, he stepped inside without waiting. Clara followed, bringing a breeze of cold perfume and her usual air of polite impatience. We thought we'd go through the paperwork together, she said, glancing around my living room as though taking inventory. It'll be easier if we walk you through the confusing sections. I'm not confused, I said. Have a seat. They did, but reluctantly. Stuart placed the documents on the table between us, tapping them with 2 fingers in that habit he had when he wanted things done quickly. You've had plenty of time, he said. Let's finalize this tonight. His voice had that tone, smoothed over authority, the kind men use when they believe they have already won. I poured tea for all of us. Not because they deserved it, but because I needed my hands to perform something steady. While the kettle hummed, I watched them from the kitchen doorway. Clara whispered something to Stuart. He frowned. Their impatience floated through the room like a sour scent. Mom, he called, could you bring the pen? Let's just handle this. Just handle this. As though my life were a light chore, they were tired of sweeping around. I placed the tea on the table and sat down. Before I sign anything, I said, I want to understand why this is important to you. Stuart shifted. It's not about us. It's about your safety. No, I said gently. Safety doesn't come tied in paperwork that takes my home. Clara's smile tightened. You're misunderstanding the documents. I read them, I cut in. Every page, every clause that transfers control, every line that replaces my decisions with yours. She looked away then, but Stuart leaned forward. Mom, don't start imagining things. It's standard procedure. We're not the enemy. Ah, there it was. The defensive insistence of someone who knows exactly what they're doing. I folded my hands. Tell me something, Stuart. Why is the transfer of my house included? Why the irrevocable power of attorney? Why would I need to surrender everything today? He exhaled sharply. Because the longer we wait, the riskier it gets. You forget things. You get overwhelmed. You need assistance. Have I asked for assistance? That's not the point. It is, I said. For the first time, he looked unsettled, as if my calm were the true disruption. Clara straightened in her chair. Evelyn, you're making this harder than it needs to be. We're trying to help you prevent a crisis. And what crisis? I asked quietly. Are you expecting? Stuart opened his mouth, but no words came out. A small, telling failure. They had expected resistance to crumble, not question. I reached into the drawer beside me, not for a pen, but for the envelope that held my notes, bank statements, and the list of unauthorized inquiries I'd uncovered. I placed it on the table. Before we continue, I said, I'd like you to explain these. Both of them froze. Their eyes flicked to the envelope as if it might explode. What is that? Stuart asked, though he already knew. Proof, I said, of what's been happening behind my back. Clara's hand trembled slightly. She hid it in her lap. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The room filled with a thick, uneasy quiet. The storm I'd felt building all week had arrived, not with lightning, but with truth laid bare. I'm not signing anything, I said softly. Not tonight. Not ever. Their silence wasn't surprise. It was fear of losing exactly what they'd tried to take, and I sat there, steady as stone, realizing I was only just beginning. The next morning arrived with a dull sky, heavy and gray, the kind that hangs low enough to touch your thoughts. I moved through the house slowly, not from weakness, but from calculation. Stuart and Clara had left the night before in a state I hadn't seen in years, silent, stiff, rattled. They weren't done, though. People who stand to lose something they believe is already theirs never walk away quietly. By noon, my prediction proved correct. Stuart called first. His voice was clipped, tired, but trying to sound composed. Mom, about last night, I think we all got emotional. Let's reset. I'll come by later, and we'll go through the papers calmly. No, I said. We won't. A pause. A soft, disbelieving scoff. Mom, you can't seriously think you don't need help with these matters? I do need help, I answered. Just not yours. He fell silent again, the weight of those words settling between us. When he finally spoke, his tone had changed. Less patient, more warning. You're making a mistake. I ended the call. An hour later, Clara appeared at my door without announcing herself. She knocked once, sharply, the way someone does when they're not seeking permission, but a stage. Evelyn, may I come in? She asked, already stepping over the threshold. I didn't offer her tea. I didn't offer her a seat. She took one anyway, smoothing her skirt as though preparing for a performance. Stuart is worried, she began. He's losing sleep over you. We all are. You've become very guarded, suspicious. It's not healthy." She said the word healthy with the confidence of someone who believed she had the authority to assess my mind. "What do you want, Clara?" Her smile wavered. "I want to understand what's going through your head. These documents are standard, necessary. You're blowing things out of proportion." "Am I?" I asked. "Then explain why the house must be transferred to you immediately." "To us?" she corrected sharply. "For efficiency. For planning. You don't want to leave a legal mess behind someday, do you?" There it was. Someday. Spoken with just enough emphasis to remind me they expected that day sooner rather than later. I walked to the kitchen counter, not to distance myself but to level the field. Clara couldn't fill the space with her presence if I chose not to sit in front of her. She watched me carefully, waiting. "Clara," I said, "do you truly believe I don't see what you and Stuart are doing?" A flicker in her eyes, quick, almost invisible, but enough. "We're trying," she insisted, "to prevent disaster. Older adults often lose perspective. We've read statistics." "Stop," I said quietly. The word landed harder than a shout. She swallowed, trying to regain control. "Evelyn, you may not realize it, but you're making choices that could harm you. Signing the documents will give everyone peace of mind." "Whose peace?" I asked. She didn't answer. The silence stretched. Heavy, uncomfortable. Her lips parted once as if to speak, but she closed them again. "You know," I said, leaning slightly against the counter, "your tone has shifted over the years. You used to at least pretend kindness. Now you don't bother." Her cheeks colored, not with shame, but with anger. "You're being unfair," she snapped. "Stuart does everything for you, everything, and you repay him with paranoia." I let the words fall. They didn't touch me. "What Stuart wants," I said, "is control disguised as responsibility." She stood abruptly, the chair scraping sharply against the floor. "This stubbornness is exactly why we need to step in before things get worse." Worse. A word chosen as pressure, not concern. She picked up her purse and marched toward the door. She paused only once, glancing back at me with a mixture of frustration and something sharper. Fear. "You're pushing him away," she said, "and when you finally need him, he may not come." "I've needed him before," I replied. "And he didn't come then either." Her breath caught. Then she left, letting the door close harder than she intended. For several minutes I stood in the quiet, listening to the echo fade through the house. I felt no guilt and no hesitation, only certainty. Their pressure was escalating because they believed time was running out. Mine was just beginning. I walked to the dining table and sat down, the room still and watchful. I opened my notebook to a fresh page and wrote one sentence. Today, they showed their hand. Then, beneath it, tomorrow, I show mine. The next morning, the house felt different. Not quieter, but expectant, as if the walls themselves sensed the shift inside me. For weeks, I'd been absorbing blows, disguising my suspicion beneath politeness. But now everything in me had settled into a kind of still strength, the kind a woman reaches only when she's done being polite. I spent the early hours preparing, not the way Stuart imagined, with trembling hands and confusion, but methodically. I arranged documents on the table, bank statements, tax receipts, insurance renewals, evidence of a life I still managed with clarity, not confusion. I wanted no ambiguity when the moment came. At 9:30, my phone rang. This time it wasn't Stuart or Clara. It was one of my attorneys, Ms. Harris. "Mrs. Marlowe," she said, her tone crisp but warm. "We've reviewed everything you left yesterday, and we believe it's prudent we attend your meeting tomorrow." "I expected you to say that," I replied. "We'll arrive 15 minutes before your son. Keep the folders somewhere visible. Don't hide them. It's important they understand you're prepared." Prepared. A word I hadn't felt applied to me in a long time. It fit now. After we hung up, I made myself breakfast. Oatmeal with cinnamon, the same simple meal I'd made since my husband passed. As I ate, I felt something like steadiness spread inside me. When life turns threatening, routine becomes a kind of shield. By the afternoon, a knock sounded at my door. Not Stuart's impatient tapping, not Clara's sharp rap. This knock was softer. I opened the door to find my granddaughter, Hannah, standing with a shy smile. "Hi, Grandma," she said. "I was in the neighborhood." A lie, gentle and transparent. She lived 40 minutes away. "I'm glad you were," I said, stepping aside. "Come in." Hannah walked through the living room with careful eyes, as though checking whether I'd changed, or whether the house held signs of the chaos simmering beneath the surface. She sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea I'd made before she asked. "Dad and Clara have been whispering a lot," she said quietly. "They won't tell me what's going on, but I can tell they're planning something." Planning. Yes, they were. "What did they say?" I asked. She hesitated. "Dad said you're overwhelmed, that he's trying to take responsibility before anything bad happens." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it confirmed everything I already knew. "Hannah," I said softly, "do I seem overwhelmed to you?" She looked at me, long, searching, and shook her head. "No," she whispered. "You seem clearer than usual." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. She had her mother's eyes, soft and observant. She'd always watched more than she spoke. "Grandma," she said after a moment, "are you in trouble?" "No," I answered. "I'm in preparation." She didn't know what that meant, but she nodded anyway, trusting me the way Stuart never had. When she left, the house felt steady again. I took out my notebook and wrote, "Hannah is the only one who asked how I am, not what I can sign." Later in the evening, the phone rang again. Stuart. "Mom," he said, sounding too level, "I'll be there at noon tomorrow. Let's finish everything. We can't drag this out." "I'll be ready," I replied. He paused, thrown by how simple that answer was. "And Mom?" "Please don't make this difficult." I let silence sit long enough to make him uneasy. "I won't," I said. And I wouldn't. Not for me, but for him. Difficult would arrive on its own when he discovered the ground beneath him wasn't as solid as he believed. After I hung up, I walked through the house slowly. I touched the back of the sofa my husband once napped on. I straightened the frame of our wedding picture. I closed the curtains in the dining room. Not because I was nostalgic, but because I was acknowledging what was mine, what I had built, what I would not be talked out of. When night fell, I didn't pace or worry. I brewed chamomile tea and sat in my favorite armchair, the one with the sun-worn fabric. I let the quiet settle around me. Not suffocating, not lonely, just honest. For the first time in weeks, I slept deeply. Tomorrow, the roles would reverse. Tomorrow, the woman they believed they could maneuver would arrive with a truth they never expected. And when Stuart sat across from me, expecting signatures, expecting surrender, expecting silence, I would look him in the eyes and reveal the one thing he feared most. I was not alone in the room anymore. I woke before sunrise the next morning, not from nerves, but from something steadier. Purpose. At 74, most mornings arrive slowly, like reluctant visitors. But this one came with a sharpness I hadn't felt in years. Today, the pretending would end. I moved through the house with deliberate calm, opening curtains, airing out the rooms, making the space feel less like a battlefield and more like a stage I'd chosen. I set the dining table with 3 chairs, one for me, one for Stuart, and one directly beside mine for the attorney who would not be hidden. At 11:30, Ms. Harris arrived. Her presence filled the room without noise. Tidy gray suit, measured steps, eyes that saw everything. She greeted me as an equal, not a client to be handled gently. "Are you ready?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "More than ready." We reviewed the plan one last time. Simple, steady, unshakable. Harris would speak only when necessary. I would lead. These were my boundaries to reclaim. At 11:57, a car door slammed outside. Not one slam. 2. Stuart and Clara had come together just as I expected. They wanted united pressure. They wanted a single voice. I opened the door before they could knock. Stuart's brows furrowed instantly. "Why is there another car?" But then he saw Harris standing behind me. The polite smile he'd prepared vanished. "Mom," he said slowly, "what is this?" "You said we'd review the documents today," I answered. "So I brought someone who can help me understand what you're asking me to sign." Clara stepped forward, indignation rising like heat from her skin. "Evelyn, this is unnecessary. Lawyers complicate things. We're family." "And yet," I said quietly, "family was the reason I knew I needed one." They followed me into the dining room. Stuart walked stiffly, like a man approaching a cliff he hadn't known existed. He sat opposite me, eyeing the documents on the table, his documents, but now there were new folders beside them, marked with legal seals that were not his. Harris took her seat next to me, calm and immovable. "Before we begin," she said, "Mrs. Marlowe would like to clarify a few items." Stuart didn't look at her. He looked at me. "Mom," he said, voice tight, "you're overreacting. This isn't what we planned." "No," I replied. "It isn't." I slid a paper across the table, the list of attempted account inquiries. His eyes flicked over it. He paled. "Explain these," I said. Mom, those were just questions. I was gathering information. For you." "For me?" I asked. "Or about me?" He didn't answer. Clara jumped in instead, her words sharp and quick. "You're misinterpreting everything. Stuart only wants to protect you. You get confused, Evelyn. You forget details. We're trying to keep you safe." Harris leaned forward, her tone controlled. "Mrs. Marlowe has full legal capacity. Her records are current, her payments timely. If she were confused, we would not be sitting here today." Clara narrowed her eyes. "This is turning into an attack." "No," I said. "This is clarity." I watched Stuart's face, the tension around his mouth, the flicker of something almost like shame before he buried it. "You expected me to sign everything without question," I said. "You expected obedience, silence, gratitude." He swallowed hard. "Mom, I just thought that I wouldn't fight," I finished. The room grew still. "I'm not signing any documents," I said. "Not today, not ever. And from this moment on, all financial matters involving me will be handled through my attorneys." Harris placed a formal notice in front of him, clean, undeniable ink. Stuart stared at it, stunned. Clara reached for his arm, whispering something frantic under her breath, but he didn't turn to her. His gaze stayed locked on me, confused, betrayed, but mostly disarmed. They had come expecting a frail woman. They found someone else entirely. When they finally rose to leave, they spoke little. The storm they'd prepared for had shifted. The ground had changed beneath them. After the door closed, Harris turned to me. "You were perfect," she said. But I didn't feel perfect. I felt steady. And that was enough. Stuart and Clara left my house angry but contained, like people who hadn't yet decided whether to beg or explode. I watched their car back out of the driveway, too fast, too sharp, before it disappeared down the street. For a moment, the quiet felt almost physical, settling around me like a curtain after a performance. Harris remained seated at the table, sorting through her notes with a composure that steadied me. "They'll react," she said calmly. "People rarely accept loss with grace." Loss. Yes, today, they lost something they thought they already owned. "Will they come back?" I asked. "Almost certainly," she said, "and likely with a different tactic. Pressure doesn't always look like documents. Sometimes it looks like guilt." She was right. By late afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from Stuart. "I'm hurt, Mom. I don't know why you treated us like criminals." Then another. "We just wanted to help. You embarrassed us. Not a word about the unauthorized financial attempts. Not a word about the lies. Only wounded pride." I set the phone aside. I didn't reply. Instead, I went outside. The air carried that pre-summer scent, warm soil, faint jasmine, a whisper of something living. My garden wasn't large, but it was mine. For years, I'd trimmed the roses alone, watered the herbs, spoken softly to the small row of lavender that always insisted on surviving winter. I crouched beside the mint bed, the earth damp beneath my fingers. This was why I was fighting. Not the money, not the house itself, but the life inside it. My routines, my choices, my independence carved over decades. When I returned inside, Harris stood near the bookshelf, reading the framed photographs. My husband smiling with a fishing hat. Hannah as a toddler, sticky with jam. Me holding a library award from 30 years ago. "You've built a life worth guarding," she said. I felt something warm in my chest. "Thank you." She gathered her briefcase. "Tomorrow we formalize everything. Attorney Bloomfield will join us. The protections we're putting in place will close every door they tried to pry open." "And after that?" I asked. "After that," she said, "your son will understand that the era of easy access is over." When she left, I locked the door, not out of fear, but habit, or perhaps new instinct. Around 7, the phone rang again. Clara, this time. "Evelyn," she said, voice trembling in a way I didn't believe for a moment. "I'm so worried about you. This hostility isn't like you. Stuart cried. Do you understand? He cried." I rested the receiver against my ear. "Is that so?" "Yes," she pressed on. "He's devastated. Your actions are cruel. He doesn't deserve to be treated like that after everything he's done." Everything he's done. The phrase landed differently now. "Clara," I said, "what exactly has he done for me?" A long silence. Then, coldly, "This is why you needed us to step in. You can't see what's best for you." "And yet," I replied, "I saw enough to hire 2 lawyers." Her breath caught, sharp, startled. She hadn't expected me to say it aloud. "This is going to break him," she said finally. "No," I answered. "It's going to inconvenience him. There's a difference." She hung up without a goodbye. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt accurate. I walked back to the dining table and reviewed the documents Harris left behind. Clean legal language, firmer than memory, stronger than sentiment. Tomorrow, the protections would be finalized. Stuart's world was shifting, and he knew it. But I wasn't shifting. I was returning to myself. As night fell, I turned off the lights and stood at the window, the street lamps glowing faintly across the lawn. Age had taken many things from me: speed, stamina, certainty. But it had given me one gift I valued far more. I no longer feared disappointing people who had long stopped caring whether they disappointed me. Tomorrow, the real confrontation would begin, and for once in my long, quiet life, I would not be the one unprepared. The next morning, a stillness hung in the house, not peaceful, not tense, but poised. A held breath. Today would be the day Stuart finally understood that the ground beneath him had shifted, and not in his favor. Attorney Bloomfield arrived first, her steps confident, her expression unreadable. She placed her briefcase on the table with the calm of someone who had seen families fracture politely, ruthlessly, inevitably. Harris arrived moments later. Together, they reviewed the finalized protections, the restrictions, the notifications, the legal barricades that now surrounded every corner of my estate. "You're fully secure," Bloomfield said. "All that remains is clarity. And sometimes, clarity requires witnesses." At exactly noon, Stuart's car rolled into the driveway. Slower this time, deliberate. Clara wasn't with him. He walked up the path alone, shoulders rigid, jaw tight. A man preparing to negotiate but not yet aware he had already lost. I opened the door before he knocked. "Mom," he said, trying for tenderness and landing on something hollow. "Can we talk? Alone?" "No," I said. "We cannot." He stepped inside before I could invite him. His eyes scanned the room, then froze when he saw Harris and Bloomfield seated at my table, folders open, pens ready. His face drained of color. "You brought lawyers?" "Yes," I said. "You told me I didn't need any, so I brought two." His lips parted, then closed again, as if he needed to rearrange his outrage into something more presentable. "Mom, this is ridiculous." He laughed a little, forced, brittle. "We're family. Lawyers are for outsiders." "They're here," I replied, "because the danger came from inside." He flinched. He actually flinched. Bloomfield spoke first. "Mr. Marlowe, we've reviewed the documents you presented to your mother. They are inappropriate, coercive, and structured in a way that would transfer all control to you without legal justification." Stuart's mouth tightened. "That's not true. I was trying to help her. She's overwhelmed. She is fully competent," Harris said. "And your attempts to access her accounts without authorization are documented." His head snapped toward me. "You checked? You went to the bank?" "Yes," I said. "And I found more than you expected me to." He dragged a hand through his hair, a gesture from childhood resurfacing under stress. "Mom, listen. Those inquiries were harmless. I was preparing for the future, that's all." "My future," I said, "is not yours to prepare." He stared at me, disbelief simmering into anger. "You think these women care about you? They're manipulating you. They want your money just as much as you think I do." Bloomfield remained steady. "We are paid by Mrs. Marlowe. We answer to her alone. You, however, attempted to obtain control of her assets through pressure and misrepresentation. That is a legal concern." Stuart's voice cracked. "I'm your son. Doesn't that mean anything?" Oh, it meant everything, just not in the way he hoped. "It means," I said, "that I wanted to trust you. But trust is measured by actions, not titles. And your actions forced me to protect myself." He stared at the documents spread across the table, the legal fortress he hadn't anticipated. Something inside him wilted. "You're shutting me out," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "I am setting boundaries. The kind I should have set long ago." He swallowed hard, emotions flickering chaotically. Anger, disbelief, something almost like sorrow. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," Bloomfield said, "you stop interfering in your mother's affairs. All future communication regarding her finances will go through our office. And," I added, "you stop bringing paperwork into my home." He looked from me to the attorneys, then back again, as if searching for a version of reality where this wasn't happening. But this was happening, and it was not fueled by anger. It was built on clarity. Slowly, he sank into the nearest chair, defeated. "Mom," he whispered, "I never thought you'd do this." "I know," I said. "That was the problem." The room fell silent. For the first time, I felt the balance of power settle exactly where it belonged. For a long moment after my words landed, Stewart simply stared at the table. Not at me, not at the lawyers, at the papers, his papers, that no longer had a future. The fight seemed to drain from his posture, replaced by something quieter and unfamiliar on him: uncertainty. Bloomfield closed one folder, the soft click sounding final. "Mr. Marlowe," she said evenly, "our goal today is not conflict. It is boundaries. Your mother retains full autonomy. Any attempt to override that will be documented and legally addressed." He didn't lift his head. "I wasn't trying to override anything," he muttered. Harris spoke next, her voice steady, but not unkind. "Then you have nothing to worry about. Respecting her decisions will resolve everything." He winced, not at her words, but at the truth behind them. Respecting my decisions was precisely the thing he had never intended to do. Clara chose that moment to walk in. She didn't knock. She stormed through the open door with the expression of someone prepared to extinguish a fire, only to find the building already reduced to ash. "Stewart, what's taking so long? Did she sign?" Her voice stopped mid-sentence when she saw the attorneys. Her face tightened, then smoothed into a brittle smile. "Oh, I didn't realize we were hosting guests." "We're not hosting," I said. "We're clarifying." Clara's gaze darted between the folders and Stewart. Her panic rose faster than his. "What is this? What did you tell them?" "Nothing," he snapped. "They already know." The moment stretched, and then Clara exhaled sharply, her mask dropping. "Evelyn, this is unnecessary. You're blowing a simple family matter into something dramatic." "That's what people say," Bloomfield replied, "when their intentions cannot survive scrutiny." Clara bristled. "Excuse me?" Harris interjected before the tension snapped. "Mrs. Marlowe has decided not to transfer any assets or authority. All attempted pressure has been documented. Going forward, any further attempts will be met with legal action." Clara scoffed. "Pressure? We were helping her. She can't manage everything at her age." "At my age," I repeated softly, "I'm capable of recognizing both kindness and exploitation. You have shown me the latter." Her cheeks flushed crimson. "This is ridiculous. Stewart, say something." But Stewart, for once, had nothing to say. He wasn't defeated. He wasn't repentant. He was stunned, realizing that the woman he'd underestimated had drawn a line he could not cross. Finally, he spoke. "Mom, why didn't you tell me you felt this way?" "I did," I answered. Not with accusations, with boundaries you ignored. His eyes glistened with something that might have been regret, or might have been the realization that he had lost something valuable. You think I don't love you, he whispered. I think, I said gently, that love without respect isn't love. It's convenience. He looked away. Clara rose, her chair scraping the floor. Fine. If you want to make yourself a victim, go ahead. But don't expect us to drop everything when something happens to you. I nodded once. Thank you for the honesty. My calm unsettled her more than anger ever could. She grabbed her purse and marched toward the door. Stuart stood more slowly. He looked older than he had yesterday, worn, uncertain, stripped of the certainty he'd always relied upon. Is this really how it's going to be now? He asked. No, I said. It's how it should have been. He didn't argue. He didn't apologize either. He simply left. When the door clicked shut, the house fell into a deep, honest silence. Harris and Bloomfield exchanged one small, satisfied glance, the kind professionals share when a line has been drawn cleanly. Mrs. Marlowe, Harris said, you handled that with grace. Grace. Not fury, not collapse. Grace. I breathed out slowly. What happens next? Bloomfield replied, Life continues, on your terms. They packed their folders and stood to leave. At the door, Harris paused. You were stronger today than most people half your age, she said. No, I answered. Today, I was simply myself. When they left, I sat alone at the table, tired, steady, and no longer afraid. For the first time in a very long while, the house felt like it belonged to me again. The morning after the confrontation felt strangely clean, like the air after a long rain. Nothing in my house had changed. The same photographs, the same quiet rooms, the same worn rug under my feet. But I had changed. Or perhaps I'd finally returned to the woman I had once been, before years of soft compliance dulled my edges. The first task was simple, though symbolic. I gathered every envelope, financial statement, and household bill into a neat stack and placed them in a drawer Stuart never knew existed. They were no longer items he could question, touch, or interpret for his own benefit. They were mine again. Quietly, firmly mine. By 10 o'clock, Bloomfield called. The protections are fully active, she said. Your accounts are locked to all outside access, including your son's. Legally, he cannot make inquiries or initiate actions. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. And the house? Secure, she confirmed. No transfer, no loopholes, no conditional clauses. If anyone attempts anything, you'll know within minutes. Minutes. After months of feeling watched, maneuvered, pushed, minutes felt like a luxury. Thank you, I said. You did most of the work, she replied. We just made it official. After I hung up, I made myself tea and sat on the back porch. The rose bushes were blooming unevenly, but they were blooming. The wind hummed softly through the fence boards. Life, in its quiet persistence, felt more loyal than my own son had been. Around noon, Hannah arrived again, this time without pretending she happened to be nearby. She walked in with her backpack, eyes scanning my face, searching for bruises of the soul rather than the skin. Grandma, she said gently, Dad's furious. I exhaled. I expected that. He says you humiliated him, she continued. But when I asked what happened, he wouldn't explain. He just kept saying you blew everything up. I smiled faintly. Some things need blowing up. She sat across from me. Are you okay? Yes, I said, and for the first time in years, the word wasn't a polite lie. I told her, not every detail, not the cruelest lines, but enough for her to understand the truth without carrying its weight. Her eyes widened, then narrowed with an anger she didn't try to hide. "He tried to take everything from you," she whispered. "He tried," I corrected softly. "And he failed." She looked down at her hands. "I don't know who he is anymore." I reached out and touched her wrist. People don't become someone else overnight. We simply stop overlooking what they've always shown us. We sat in silence for a moment, a rare, comforting kind. Then she straightened. "What do you want to do now?" she asked. "Live," I said, "on my own terms." In the afternoon, I visited the bank once more, not out of fear, but completion. Mr. Alden greeted me with a warm smile, clearly already informed by my attorneys. "Your account alerts are active," he said. "If anyone attempts access, even a question, you'll receive notice." "Good," I said. "I don't want shadows in my finances anymore." He nodded. "You deserve transparency." Transparency, a word I had tasted rarely in recent years. Before leaving, I updated my emergency contacts, removing Stuart and Clara entirely. Seeing their names vanish from the form felt like exhaling a burden I'd carried without realizing its weight. When I returned home, I sat again at the dining table, the same table where Stuart once tapped his fingers impatiently, expecting my life to fold neatly beneath his plans. Now the surface was clear. Open. Mine. I took out my notebook and wrote, "These boundaries are not punishment. They are protection of my life, my peace, and what remains of my dignity." Outside, the sun dipped low, painting the edges of the yard gold. For years, I had feared this stage of life, being alone. Now I realized I wasn't alone. I was free. They had lost access, but I had regained myself. In the days that followed, the house settled into a new kind of quiet, one without tension, without waiting, without the ache of anticipating another intrusion. Silence can be a wound, but it can also be a balm. This time, it felt like the latter. On Wednesday morning, I sat with my tea and watched sunlight inch across the table. For years, I had lived inside a rhythm shaped by other people's demands. Stuart's rushed visits, Clara's instructions disguised as kindness. Now, the rhythm belonged to me again, my time, my pace, my breath. But there was still one thing left to do. I called the attorneys first. "I'm ready to finalize the trust," I told them. "Of course," Harris replied. "We'll prepare everything. Tomorrow morning?" "Tomorrow is fine." After that, I called Hannah. "Grandma?" she answered, her voice soft with concern. "Is everything okay?" "Yes," I said. "I'd like you to come with me tomorrow. There's something I want you to witness." She didn't ask what. She simply said, "I'll be there." I spent the rest of the day gathering the documents Harris requested: identification, property files, account overviews. Each paper felt lighter than it had weeks ago. They no longer represented what could be stolen. They represented what I could protect. That night, I stepped outside to water the garden. The breeze moved gently through the lavender, carrying a scent that reminded me of summers before my husband died, when life still felt long, and Stuart still came to me for advice instead of opportunities. I wasn't nostalgic. I was simply acknowledging the contrast. Some memories heal, some instruct. In the morning, Hannah arrived early. Her eyes were sharper now, older in a way only truth can make someone. "You look stronger," she said uncertainly. "I feel it," I replied. We drove together to the attorney's office. She didn't fill the silence with questions or assumptions. She just sat beside me, present in a way her father hadn't been in years. Inside, Bloomfield reviewed the final documents. Clear, precise, airtight. The trust, she explained, ensures that your assets, your home, your savings, your investments, are protected and transferred according to your wishes. No one can contest it without exposing themselves. And the beneficiary? I asked, though I already knew. Whomever you name, she said. I glanced at Hannah. Her breath caught slightly, a quiet uncertainty flickering across her features. I want her, I said. Bloomfield nodded and began writing. Hannah blinked. Grandma, are you sure? I don't want you to think you owe me anything. I don't, I said. This isn't payment. It's intention. She lowered her gaze, blinking hard. Your father, I continued gently, made choices that distanced him from my life. You made different ones. I didn't do anything special, she whispered. You showed up, I said, without expecting anything in return. That's rarer than you think. When the documents were ready, Bloomfield slid them to me. I signed each page slowly, deliberately, the way a woman signs her name when reclaiming it. Hannah watched silently, tears gathering but not falling. Afterward, Harris placed the final folder in my hands. Everything is legally sealed. No one, not your son, not his wife, can undo this without your consent. Good. I'd spent too many years watching other people try to rewrite the edges of my life. As we drove home, Hannah finally spoke. Dad, he's going to be angry. He'll adjust, I said. And if he doesn't? I looked out at the passing houses, the small, ordinary world that had held my quiet battles. Then that's his work to do, not mine. When we reached my driveway, she hugged me tightly, tighter than she ever had. There was no fear in her, no awkwardness, just respect. Thank you, she whispered. Not for the trust, but for trusting me. After she left, I went inside and placed the trust folder in the same drawer where Stuart's old documents once lay. But that drawer felt different now. Lighter, cleared of shadows. I stood there a moment, letting the truth settle. I had not just protected my home. I had chosen who deserved to inherit the life I built. Not the one who expected it, but the one who earned it. In the days after the trust was finalized, something inside me softened. Not into weakness, but into a steadiness that comes only after a storm passes and you realize you're still standing. The house seemed to breathe easier too. Or perhaps it was just me, finally moving without the weight of someone else's intentions pressing against my back. Stuart didn't call. Clara didn't message. Their silence, once a wound, now felt like space. Wide, clean, necessary. I didn't celebrate their absence. I simply didn't miss their presence. For the first time in months, my routines returned to me unharmed. I woke early, opened the curtains, made tea without glancing at the phone, without anticipating another disguised demand. I walked through each room slowly, reacquainting myself with the life they'd tried to compress into paperwork. I was not fragile. I was not lost. I was simply older, and older does not mean erased. On Friday afternoon, Hannah stopped by again. She didn't ring the bell. She knocked softly and waited, patient as always. When I opened the door, she smiled, not the nervous smile of someone tiptoeing around family tension, but the easy smile of someone who knows where she stands. "Grandma, I brought you something," she said. She held out a small, potted rosemary plant. "You said your old one didn't survive the winter." I took it carefully. Thank you. Rosemary's stubborn. It needs someone who pays attention. She laughed. Just like you. We sat on the porch steps together, the sun low and warm on our backs. For a while, we said nothing at all, just listening to the birds, the distant hum of a neighbor's lawnmower, the quiet comfort of being understood without explanation. After a long moment, she spoke. Do you think Dad will ever apologize? No, I said honestly. I don't think apologies come from people who believe they've done nothing wrong. She nodded, absorbing it without bitterness. And if he tries to come back into your life? Then he comes back on my terms, I said. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors with locks. And I decide who gets a key. She looked at me with that soft, searching expression she inherited from her mother. I'm proud of you. The words struck something deep, something tender I thought age had made unreachable. I placed my hand over hers. I'm proud of me, too. When she left, I planted the rosemary near the lavender. Two stubborn things growing beside each other, one seasoned, one new. I stood there a long time, letting the breeze lift the edges of my hair. Age had taken many things. Speed, certainty, the illusion that family love is always safe. But it had given me clarity. And clarity, I'd learned, is a kind of power. A quiet one, a dignified one, a lasting one. Inside the house, the trust documents rested in their drawer, protected, final. I no longer felt the urge to check them. What needed to be secured was secured. What needed to be said had been spoken. What needed to be ended had ended. In the mirror near the hallway, I caught my reflection. A silver-haired woman with steady eyes. A woman who had been underestimated by her own child, but not by herself. For the first time in a very long time, I whispered, You did well. And for the first time, I believed it deeply. My story wasn't loud, it wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and I had reclaimed every inch of it. If someone tries to take your life, your voice, your choices, remember this. You are allowed to defend the ground you stand on, and if you're reading this and something in my story feels familiar, even painfully so, then hear me clearly. Don't stay silent. Don't shrink. Don't surrender what you've earned. Stand up for yourself. Quietly or loudly, but firmly, fully, and without apology. And if this story touched you, share it, save it, or leave a comment so more women can remember their worth.